This is a lot of research distilled into one 3-page front and back document for you so that you don't have to go reinvent the wheel if somebody asks you questions. And it can just kind of give you the general idea of some of the major reasons why we are pro-life, okay? But the first thing is you can't begin a discussion about abortion without analyzing what life is to be terminated. Because if you go kill a spider, it's not an issue, right? People thank you. I would thank you. I would kiss your hand if you killed a spider. But if you kill a baby, it's different, right? And it's because of the human life that is represented in the baby. So what you have to do is, the initial thing, and Monty exhorts this all the time, is you have to control the definitions, because it's very nice and convenient to refer to babies as fetuses or cells or masses of tissue and things like that. But why do you think that, as Jenny said, when people get a 4D or a 3D ultrasound, that all of a sudden it's a different story, right? Because you start seeing that this is a human. So define it as a human person, because that's in fact what it is. And the arguments for that are there. There's some scriptures there. They've kind of come up already. But technology, a lot of people say science and the Bible, science and faith don't go hand in hand, but I will say science and faith go very well in hand when we're talking about pro-life and in many other respects. But the more we know about what's going on inside the womb, the more convinced even the scientific community is that it's a human life and that it's starting much earlier than everyone initially supposed it to start. So there's a little chart here, or just kind of walks through within 2 weeks of conception, within 3 weeks of conception, what's going on with the baby. And notably, within 4 weeks of conception, the baby already has a heartbeat, a detectable heartbeat, so that you could actually, it's a little bit more undeniable at that point. But even before that, and this is something that Monty and I were discussing, that you have the female egg and the male sperm are both living organisms, which when you come together, you have a fertilized egg, which is the very, very start of the baby. Well, the egg and the sperm are alive. They come together to form something that is alive. The baby starts alive. It doesn't start dead. So this argument that there's no human life until some magical point at some point in the pregnancy, and people have all different ideas for when that is, really seems to lack merit. Okay, so I realize, though, that you're going to probably lose some people when you talk about conception, because people still feel like, looks a little bit like a tadpole, that sperm in the egg, whatever. But at a minimum, if you can try to get people at the fact that the heart starts beating within 4 weeks of conception, that is grounds to terminate life, right? If somebody flatlines, then we assume that they are dead. So why can we not argue the inverse of that, that if someone's heart is beating, then therefore they are alive? So that's just an additional point to pull out, because there's a lot of logical inconsistencies with people's arguments. Then there's the whole issue of viability, and Pam mentioned this really quickly, but have you guys heard about that argument before, that the baby is a baby when it becomes a viable fetus? Do we know what that means? It basically means that the baby could survive outside the mother's womb. Okay, so a lot of the medical community has turned to this argument that the baby, if it cannot survive outside the mother's womb, is therefore part of the mother and therefore subject to her choices, just if she wants to choose to paint her fingernails or eliminate this baby on the inside. Okay, that's where that argument kind of comes from. But if you think about the problem with that, is how many children are dependent on their mothers and for how long thereafter. So the logical consequence of this, and some people who are really honest about the logical consequences of this argument, is that you're promoting infanticide, because essentially the baby, who is super dependent on the mother thereafter for feeding, for going to the bathroom, for everything, they're just so incredibly helpless. What this has led to is for honest scientists to say what we should really be allowed to do then is for mothers to kill babies even while they're outside the womb. The baby could have been living for 6 months if the baby has medical issues. So this is where that argument is headed, and you just need to be aware that the viability argument has some problems. Yes?
There's a famous professor back east, Peter Sanger, who tells his students up to 2 years old the mothers should be able to kill their kids.
Interesting.
I think
Yes.
Princeton University.
Yeah. And he's an ethicist. So that's kind of ironic. So then you just move along and think about all of the reasons why a culture would generally approve abortion. Another problem is, if you look at Roman numeral 2, it's the purpose of sex. Our society does not think that sex is a means of having children. They think it's a means of recreation, of being cherished, as that one girl had said. That's what sex is. It's not for the purpose of having children. But if you look at biology across every species, sex produces offspring. That is the biological purpose of sex. And so we need to quit detaching babies as being a natural consequence of this and only being an unwanted side effect, an unwanted pregnancy, and oops. Well, that's what happens from sex. One of the other things just to emphasize is the pro-choice position markets itself as being very compassionate, because what we have here is a girl who is in a position where she doesn't want this child for whatever host of reasons. And so the compassionate thing is to let that woman make that decision to do what she wants with the massive tissue that is inside of her. But this is a real cloak to hide something very insidious. And the typical emotional arguments that get many people to say, okay, I agree that maybe I don't want to have an abortion, but you should have the right to have an abortion, goes back to, what if there's rape or incest involved? What if the baby is going to have different developmental issues? What if you know it's going to be a Down syndrome baby and you can keep it from being born at all? Or what if the baby's going to be born into extreme poverty? I mean, is it, that's not fair to have the baby be born into extreme poverty. And just this outline will give you some arguments to discuss. First off, the statistical probability of some of these circumstances, as well as some of the logical fallacies of positions that would still allow for, or would say an abortion is morally justified in these circumstances. So take a look at those as well. And also, abortion has numerous victims, not all of which are the baby. That's just one victim. Other victims, as you've heard, the mothers. The mothers are often very distraught after the fact, and you've heard about that tonight. And there's also increased health side effects that you heard about from mothers. This is also a problem for society as a whole. I don't think that any of us would argue that casual sex without consequence has been a good thing for society. It doesn't make us nicer people. It doesn't make us more responsible. Instead, it makes women more sex objects, and it makes men man-boys because they never have to grow up. Sorry, don't be offended. But if people were forced to take responsibility for their actions earlier on, that's generally proven to be a good thing for society as a whole. The other part that's very much cloaked in this whole argument is the fact that overwhelmingly the recipients of abortion are racial minorities. They are recipients of abortion disproportionate to their numbers in this country, meaning that even though the minorities are minorities, they're not the majority, they're getting in a conglomerate a majority of the abortions in this country. So there's a lot of research now trying to come to light to show that African American neighborhoods are being targeted, that there are surgical facilities placed closer to them than other places so that they can walk and get an abortion. And maybe in and of itself, this fact wouldn't be so compelling to show that there's a race issue to abortion, but if you put that in conjunction with information that we know about Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers and what their founders were about, well, they were about purifying the race of racial impurities, of bad genes. Who does that sound like? Hitler. That sounds like ethnic cleansing. But that was a lot of the motivation for the people that formed these organizations and that made abortion access easy, because it was about purifying the race of the undesirables. And this is not an argument just to blush over. This is a very compelling argument, and now that it's coming to light, it's starting to change a lot of minds. And there's some quotes on there about Margaret Sanger. There are some statistics about the different numbers of races getting abortions and in what proportions and all of that. And there are some additional resources on the back. But I don't want to leave on just a negative note, but there's a positive approach to abortion, and you have heard it tonight, that yes, it's a sin, we're going to call it what it is. It's taking a human life, but let's be part of going out there and changing minds and providing resources for girls who are in these positions, and for providing homes for children who are classified as the unwanted. Let's make them wanted kids, right? Let's go adopt them. Let's go out there and be loving advocates for people who are going through this, and point them to some help, that they will have an option. They'll feel like they have a better option than going to the clinic and taking a pill or getting the surgery and regretting it thereafter. So that is all.